Yes, good to see you all. I'm Chris McCracken. I've just recently taken over as the chair of Northern Ireland for ATCM, so hope to get to meet some of you and with more time, maybe in person at future events. But I currently run the Linen Quarter Business Improvement District in Belfast, in the South City Centre. So I've been doing that for the last 6 years. But before that, I've been working in city management for the last 20 years, both in London and in Belfast. So it's really interesting to be part of ATCM, which brings a lot of these policies and ideas together, and it's got such a really important voice for the UK and Ireland, and really good to try and spread some of that best practice to some of our local areas. So if there's anything I can do to help over the coming months, please do get in touch. And my email, if you want to take a note, is chris@linenquarter.org. I think you've got a lot to get through today, OJ, so I'll pass back to you.
Right, supporting high street policy and practice. We have obviously something rather big to talk about today. So we're back. And I'm not just talking about ATCM meetings following the Christmas break. No, you know what I'm talking about. Thankfully, power sharing has been restored at Stormont. So it means the Northern Ireland Executive and the Assembly is back in action. So just this week, just yesterday, key figures were in Stormont and Stormont Castle, including Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, First Minister Michelle O'Neill, and Deputy First Minister Emily Little-Pengelly, all in Belfast yesterday, all discussing the return to power sharing. And it's not a moment too soon. It's really good news. I think, I'll be honest, guys, I was sometimes having sleepless nights over how you guys are getting on without a functioning assembly. I think it's really good that things are back in motion again. And there's a lot to get through. There are so many challenges that have built up. I mean, across the UK, there's challenges anyway. There's lots of things for various governments to work through. The fact that these challenges have been happening for Northern Ireland as well, without a functioning executive, has only multiplied the risks that are out there. So in terms of funding, multiple challenges for multiple areas: health, education, policing, you know, the A5, some big regeneration projects. And of course, the impact on towns and city centres has been fairly tangible as well. The communities department has been one of the worst hit, I think, in terms of its funding gap. So budgets for local organisations, regeneration projects, etc., hit particularly hard. So it's been a difficult time. Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary of State, has used a carrot and stick approach in terms of the negotiations. Money has certainly been a big part of it. And I suppose this is a surprise to absolutely no one. He has found the DUP tough negotiators. So I think that's fair to say most will find the DUP tough negotiators. So money has been a key issue at the part of the debate. He's used the threat of budget cuts alongside the promise of a 3.3 billion funding package to help get a deal over the line. But while the money is important, obviously these negotiations were not just about money. Money was always only going to be a very small part of the picture. In fact, it's for completely different reasons that power sharing was ceased in the first place. And it was ceased down to dissatisfaction of unionists with the Brexit agreement that was put in place, specifically the Northern Ireland Protocol, which introduced a range of international customs, paperwork, and also supplementary declarations in terms of the trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that was unacceptable for a number of unionists. This was eased a little bit under the Windsor framework. So the Windsor framework looked to work through some of those challenges identified by unionists by creating a smoother trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. One of the biggest features of the Windsor framework was the implementation of a green lane, red lane system. So those goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and staying in Northern Ireland would not need extensive checks. Those, and would therefore go through the green lane. Those goods that would go from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, but are likely to go on to the Republic of Ireland and therefore the EU, that would go in the red lane and would be subject to extensive checks. So that was put in place to make life a little bit easier, and also put in place was introduced was this concept of the Stormont break, which effectively gives Northern Ireland an opt-out to any new EU rules. So this is what they call dynamic alignment, whereby Northern Ireland's laws and rules in terms of goods would evolve as the EU's own rules evolve, so they would stay in tandem. What was introduced by the Windsor framework was the ability for Northern Ireland to opt out of any new rules if it felt it wasn't in Northern Ireland's best interests, so it could remain more closely aligned to the UK. None of this was quite enough to pacify the DUP. So the question is, what has changed to make a deal possible? Now, this is where we start to get into the detail of what's come forward. So on the 30th of January, we got word that Sir Geoffrey Donaldson had announced the endorsement of a new agreement drawn up with the UK government. And this was outlined in the command paper called Safeguarding the Union that has been published in the past few days. And I've taken a look at it so we can go through some of the details. And it's quite clear that the document, when you read through it, it has been designed specifically to address some of those concerns of the DUP, with tougher language underlining the role of Northern Ireland within the UK. But while the language is certainly tougher, there is a question mark, actually, and I think it's a fair question to ask, is whether the content is significantly different from that which was in the Windsor framework. The difference between the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was part of the original Brexit agreement, and the Windsor framework, those two are quite different, and the Windsor framework is quite a big departure from the NI protocol. However, the difference, I think, from the Windsor framework and Safeguarding the Union, probably more about language than it is about any of the tangible details. But you know, it might be something we want to have a discussion on. Like, I'm not sure exactly how relevant it is to us, but let's go through the details anyway. So this command paper appears to address some of those concerns of the DUP, and what it does is it introduces new legislation which looks specifically at affirming Northern Ireland's constitutional status within the UK, guaranteeing that Northern Ireland has unfettered access to the UK's internal market. So for the first one, the legislation merely just reaffirms Northern Ireland is part of the UK. Debate amongst yourselves whether legislation is needed for that. The second one, guaranteeing Northern Ireland's unfettered access to the UK's internal market. Again, not sure whether legislation is needed for that. So what that talks about specifically is the flow of goods from Northern Ireland into the rest of the UK and making sure Northern Ireland's businesses have access to the UK. As far as I understand, that was never an issue. The EU, when Brexit happens and there then becomes a trade border between the UK and the EU, where the EU has been precious about standards and says UK goods needs to meet the standards of the EU, so that flow of goods from UK into the EU single market has to be checked. There's not necessarily the same pressure going the other way. So it has always been within the UK's gift to say goods coming in from Northern Ireland, we don't need to check. Whether that needs new legislation, I'm not entirely sure. And then legislation will also be used to create the Stormont break. Like I say, Windsor Framework had already created that concept. And so this is just the next natural step that it comes into force through legislation. What will also change is the green lane system will change, and it will be replaced by what's called a UK internal market system. And that is designed so while the green lane might involve some light touch checks for things which are destined for Northern Ireland, I think the internal market system looks to reduce those checks even further. And there is a commitment that 80% of all freight movement will be free from EU checks. And note the language, free from EU checks. They still might be subject to checks, but those checks will be checks done by the UK for internal issues. So there might still be checks, but they won't be EU checks. On top of this, there'll also be the creation of an East-West Council, which will consist of representatives from government, business, and the education sector, who will explore deeper connections between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. And, you know, they look at things like arts and culture and education and trade. And then on top of that, there'll be the creation of this Intertrade UK body, which will be there to promote trade within the UK. So they're the bare bones of the agreement. There's more in there, but I think much of it probably isn't too relevant to us. But like I say, I think much of it is more around the language more than it is the substance. That's why you probably will hear talk of people who are really keen, like really key unionists, possibly to the right of the DUP, saying they're not particularly happy with this agreement because it doesn't actually move the dial very much. But for the DUP, it is enough, along with the funding package and probably with pressure building as well to get the executive moving again. But in that time, the executive has been absent. We've had a hiatus for almost exactly 2 years now, I think. Was it February 2022 when Stormont stopped functioning? That will come with its consequences. So we've got a legacy of issues we are going to need to work through to make sure we get our policy framework back in the right place where you guys are enabled to do the work you need to do to support your areas. So what we want to discuss today is we do want to have a chat about the things you think the executive and the assembly need to pick up relating to high streets and town centres as a matter of urgency. What are the top priorities that have been neglected that we need to pick up and run with straight away? So I will be looking to come over to Belfast as soon as I can. Now, I do have the challenge of the ATCM Place Management Conference at the end of the month, which we need to plan for. But I am hoping to come over to Belfast as soon as I can to have a conversation with civil servants about what needs to happen as quickly as possible to get things up and running again. But even before we discuss that, we want to have another consultation first, and I'm going to kick this off straight away, is we do have challenges around finances, and regardless of this deal, those challenges are still there. There is a need to balance the books despite the new funding that's going to come in. And the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Chris Eaton Harris, has been explicit in saying that the black hole needs to be closed. So he has asked civil servants already to explore revenue raising options. Some of the things he's asked them to explore include measures such as charges for domestic water, prescription charges, tuition fees for universities, but something else in there as well is a reduction in business rate relief. So this is certainly relevant for us. So there are two questions in a consultation which came out late last year, non-domestic rating measures, which I think we will take a look at. So this consultation comes from the Department for Finance, and comes with the explicit aim of looking to increase revenues. And it looks at reliefs for industrial property, freight and transport, student halls of residence, and of course, vacant units. The deadline is in a couple of weeks' time, so we need to make sure if we feel it's relevant to us, we get our response in. And so on the case of vacant units, there's a couple of things they do want us to take a look at. And I think it's important to say, it's important to give the context as well, that business rates is incredibly expensive for small businesses. It's one of the biggest challenges the high street has, I think, in modern day UK. And it's a challenge across the UK. And I think in Northern Ireland, I think businesses might even be disproportionately harmed by the cost of business rates. At the same time, though, it is something which is used to help fund public services. And public services are probably underfunded enough. So there's a real challenge there. So currently, non-domestic properties, the commercial properties, when they become vacant, there are no business rates paid from the date of vacancy. There is this buffer zone of about 3 months of vacancy. And after those 3 months have elapsed, 50% of the normal occupied rent is then, of the normal occupied rate is then charged on the property owner. Now, what the consultation suggests is that this should be changed to remove that 50% rate and charge it at 100% of the occupied rate. And this suggestion is being made because there is a belief that this relief is projected to cost nearly 20 million in this financial year. So 20 million, this will save the executive that can be invested in other things. It's also important to note that the cost of this does not fall on the executive itself. It also falls on the district council. So the cost is actually shared 50-50. So I don't think it's necessarily a case, though, that there is going to be a straight saving from district councils of half of this money, or 10 million, if this relief is removed, because it is very likely that if the executive needs to save money, if it says district councils are going to make an extra 10 million by removing this relief, it can fund district councils a little bit less. So I don't think that that money is all going to come back to district council, so we have to bear that in mind. So we're looking at the removal of business rates relief of that 50%, which will go to 100%. So the questions are, should this relief be removed? And what is the impact of removing this relief? So should the relief be removed, and what's the impact of removing this relief? So they're the two questions, and that's where I want to open things up. And no doubt, I guess people from bids and local authorities will have a very different view as to what impact there might be. But I'm happy to hear all views, and Laura and I will put something together on the basis of your responses.
Probably the unpopular one. I think it should be removed, and the reason being is we find here with a lot of our landlords are very complacent. There's also zero rates on a listed property to be on a vacant listed property as well, which is a big bugbear here as well, for they'll just do absolutely nothing. If it was applied, it would maybe focus them on letting their properties be let. We have done different schemes, our urban investment scheme, which is and we're about to go out with another call to get businesses into empty properties. The landlords stroke owners are so, don't want to negotiate price for rent. I don't get that either. A building's maybe been empty for 3 years and they won't budge. They're going to save, they're paying vacant rates. Maybe the 100% is what they need to get things like that over the line. granted, I know that's not going to be popular.
Maybe not popular, but
Yeah,
Melanie, you're not the first person to say it across the UK. There have been members who have said actually there needs to be more in place to incentivize property owners to get
yeah,
property back into use again. So, and yeah, it's not going to be popular amongst those who own property, but
yeah,
there's there will be a number of others who will echo that sentiment.
yeah.
Yeah,
Chris, can I bring you in?
I agree with Melanie. I mean, the vacancy and dereliction rates in the town centres is just getting worse. And there is no incentive for anybody to do up their property. Now, I may be wrong in this, but is there something about they don't pay rates if the roof caved in or something? What if they allow it to go, they're actually encouraging you. Maybe I'm wrong, to go into disrepair. It's cheaper.
I think there is that, but with it being the city centre, I know we have a couple like that, and building control and that have been out, and they've had to do things. I think we're slightly different than England, OJ. I might be wrong. But it's only whenever they get to that state that council can step in and do something. But I think in England they can maybe step in before that. I don't know if that's right or not.
So in England, it was the same, although the rules around this are changing to allow local authorities to be a bit more proactive because of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, where we've got high street rental auctions whereby a local authority can step in and force the reletting of a property that's been neglected. And also the streamlining of the compulsory purchase order as well, whereby a local authority can buy the property off a property owner again if it's been neglected.
I suppose that's the difference. Council don't buy property in Northern Ireland. We're different functions. So
Because we
yeah.
have that issue, sorry, in Larne, we've had to close off a street, and it's been now nearly 2 years done this street. And what it was the property became unsafe. Now the people don't live in the country, and it's been going down legal and the costs of that. So with us having to close the street off because it was marked as unsafe and it's been cordoned off, the businesses in that street were affected because it reduced their footfall. Now pedestrian access is allowed, but not vehicles. And they have been shouting and shouting, and the council don't have any powers, and we've even had MLAs coming in shouting about it, and we were like, well, it's the executive that changes what we can do here,
Yeah.
but it's trying to force them to go and do something to make the building safe. And that would be one of the big bugbears with us, because they have a property and it's derelict, they're not paying anything on it. And it's really the ground that it's on is the value to them, not the maintenance of a building. They don't care if it falls down, but it has an impact on other businesses within that area. And as I say, this has been going on quite a long time. So you own a building, let it crumble. It's the actual ground that it's on, the land that it's on, rather than the building that is worth anything to you. But it doesn't help the businesses.
No.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, Lisa, that sounds like it's almost like the system itself needs to be reformed, and it's the same across the UK. Just challenges around property and land ownership, which don't make it easy when you're managing a town centre, which probably needs to be looked at. Almost looking at this relief is, it doesn't give us the sort of strategic reform that we need, and it might be one of the things we come to when we discuss what should the executive be looking at as a priority. And actually, it's not just tinkering around with the reliefs, but probably something a little bit more fundamental than that. Gillian, I'm going to bring you in a second. Chris, going to bring you in first.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at the other side of it as well, and that is legitimate businesses that are trying to trade. Let's say a tenant has given notice. It does take time for a new tenant to be found and for the legals and various other issues to go through. The new business or the landlord also then has to take a hit on their rent, because the new business coming in will maybe negotiate 6 months rent free to pay for fit out costs and things like that. So we do need a functioning landlord market, and it's important not to hit it too hard with taxes at a time where it will be difficult for many landlords. And bear in mind that some of these landlords aren't necessarily big multinational corporations with deep pockets. It can be fairly local owners, maybe professional service people who have invested in a commercial property. So I think it's good that we have a 3 month period of zero rate. I think we should then propose that we maintain another 3 months at 50%. So in other words, there's no change for the first 6 months. And I think that does then give people reasonable time to find a new tenant and go through all the legals, etc. At a time where it could be a financial stress for landlords. So that keeps the market fairly stable, and I think that's reasonable. And then after 6 months, I think then with the other points, the issue of dereliction is something that we do need to tackle. So we shouldn't be funding landowners to keep properties shuttered and derelict. And I agree, then if we then go to 100%, that will encourage landlords to maybe adjust their price expectations and let the market take over. If they can't get the rent that they're expecting, they'll have to bring that rent down, or else they'll have to pay 100% tax themselves. So that'll encourage a reduction in rents, which then unblocks maybe small entrepreneurs that want to come in, and it creates more affordable property for them. So I think just having that sort of balanced approach where effectively no change for 6 months and then 100% tax would be a good proposal. The other issue that was raised there about dereliction, we do need to tackle those properties that have been delisted for rates and are paying nothing. And there does need to be some sort of dereliction tax as well, so that people just can't keep property for years and years and years without paying any tax, and no incentive or push to get it back on the market. At some stage, a landowner either needs to refurbish and rent out their property, or sell it on to someone else who will refurbish and rent it out, or redevelop the site.
It's getting them refurbished though, isn't it? We're actually talking to a guy that's buying some property here in Lisburn, and it's great that he's been proactive on getting them fit for purpose. We find, with our urban regeneration, there was at least 3 that businesses would like to have went in, but they were in such a state. But the landlords, no, if you want it, this is how it is, and expect them to put the money in to get them fit for purpose. It's
Well,
ridiculous.
I think quite often, an occupier will have to fit out the unit, but it does need to be at a basic standard to fit it out.
Mhm.
And, most occupiers will negotiate, as I say, a reduction in rent to sort of offset that fitting out cost. But one proposal that we could do, and I know this is complicated, governments don't like hypothecation, but could you say that a certain proportion of the money that will be raised from additional tax or a dereliction tax is then hypothecated to go into some sort of vacant to vibrant fund that councils can help fund refurbishment of commercial properties?
We're actually trying to get a regeneration and growth fund off the ground. It's underspend in our council here, but it's working out the whys and wherefores of that really, and how we're going to get that distributed. So that's why we've been talking a lot to developers lately, to get that over the line. But it's sort of along what you're saying, although it's been funded by council. But yeah, it'd be good to have a lot more money in that pot.
Mhm.
Yeah, Chris, that idea, that's actually in the run up to the UK general election. That's ATCM has been thinking along a similar line. So we've had the introduction of the high street rental auctions in England. The regs for that still need to come out, but we're not sure it will work. It will be practical. So an alternative we've been thinking up as a policy going into the general election is something like a tax on neglected empty property, whereby you will use those funds to then reinvest back into the town centre, just to help vibrancy, whatever measures that might be. So it sounds like it would be on a similar line. So I'm certainly up for thinking about how that might work, and it might be I don't know if it's enough within the scope of the consultation, we might be able to suggest it as an alternative. If it's just outside the scope of the consultation, then certainly in terms of the priorities we think the executive needs to be getting on with, then it might be something we can add to that list. But I'm certainly interested in the idea and seeing if we can flesh something out. Julian, do you want to come in? I know you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, no, I was just surprised Melanie said that the council has underspent to spend. And I'm going, oh God, give me some of
Your
that.
causeway, aren't you, Julie?
That was
Say it,
great.
love.
But I just think this whole consultation is just like picking at the edges. It's not really going into any great depth in terms of town centres. I think it needs to be looked as a whole, not just at vacant rates, but business rates and new occupier rates and just the whole system. So I think it is just sort of picking at the edges. I agree with what Chris is saying. And I think then you need the added layer on in terms of if a new business comes in that they do get subsidy in terms of those rates going forward. We have had our revals. One of the other big things I think within Northern Ireland is the collection of rates is at a very low percentage because their data and their information is not up to date. Now, I'm sure the bid people around this table are probably shaking their heads at that and going, yeah, it just really is a pain in terms of trying to get that, even that database pulled together, getting the right owners. So I don't think there's been an emphasis on the actual collection. And it'd be interesting to find out what is the deficit in terms of the collection rates, because that could have a major impact as well in terms of what they decide to do going forward. So I don't have any sort of solutions or anything to that. I just think that there's other things that need to be taken into consideration under this consultation. I think it's too finite. It's not looking at things in a whole, and it really is just picking at the edges. And I don't think what they're proposing is going to make a massive difference within our town centres, to be honest. But I agree, if we can get them up to 100% in terms of vacant, those vacant properties that do sit for a year, 2 years, 3 years. And I think because within Northern Ireland, we've been handing out revitalise grants and things like that, people just wait for those to come around rather than being more proactive. So that's just my observations over the last few years.
Yeah, I think that does seem sensible to me. I think in terms of the collection as well, is the collection primarily a challenge, not necessarily amongst not for property where it is occupied and you do have a business where you can collect the money, but when it's the property owner you're collecting the money from, because sometimes we don't know who to contact. I know many other parts of the UK, we have a real challenge in being able to identify who property owners are. So in terms of collection, when it comes to business rates, when the property is empty, it becomes a bigger challenge. Is that the same for Northern Ireland?
Yeah, it's both. And I'm sure the bid members, plus they're more at the coalface in terms of that data and evidence that's needed in terms of who's the property owner, what's the rate of value, and getting that levy in. For me as a town manager within council, we're not really at that coalface in terms of getting that in. It's within our finance department, so I'm sure the bid members will want to come in on that point.
Yeah, Jamie, go on.
Yeah, happy to come in on that. Through the bids in Northern Ireland, we actually had a look at this about maybe a couple of years ago, and I think some of the data that we were getting sent through from LPS was up to 20% inaccurate. So that gave us significant problems to try and find out proper ownership. But then there's a process, quite a laborious process then of completing forms to send in information to LPS to then get that changed before we can even levy pay. So it's clear that the information isn't up to date and there's a body of work to do with that. I think Chris and Jolene both make valid points, and Chris's point on the timeline seems very pragmatic and practical to me. Another point we haven't talked about yet is the tactic in Northern Ireland currently of vacant properties and landlords inserting short-term leases to clients with charitable status with the the blatant intention of not contributing to rates. And please don't beat me for being anti-charity, because I'm not. But we do have examples of people with charity statuses taking on multiple venues within a town space and using them as stores or meeting rooms or whatever, just solely to have no rateable value there. So within this consultation, these other elements and minutiae that Johnny was talking about do then need to be brought into consideration when we're talking about something even as simple as vacant units. Just another point to discuss, guys.
No, fair comment, and something I've heard across the UK as well, is that challenge with the rates relief for businesses with charitable status, and how that can change the character of a town centre, because there's a lot of property owners that want that security of an organisation that isn't going to pay rates. No, is a challenge. Is there anybody that doesn't agree with Chris's idea of you have 3 months of 0 rates relief on an empty property, you then have 3 months of 50% rate relief on an empty property, and then at the end of those 6 months, then you go up to 100%. So for those property owners who are looking to relet, it just buys them a bit of time to make sure they get a new occupier in, provides a little bit of leeway. But where we are looking at a case of the property owners not bothered about doing anything, then the 100% rates is going to catch up with them eventually. Anybody disagree with that idea?
No, I think it shows reasonableness, really, doesn't it?
It sounds reasonable to me. The only I would be inclined to go with it. The only alternative I would think about, but it might be a case that the way we fund local authorities at the moment, there just isn't the resource to do this, but local authorities have a little bit of discretion in being able to say that property owner is making an effort to relet the property. So let's extend the business rates for them. That property owner is clearly just abandoned the property. Let's bring in 100% business rates for them. There is a financial incentive for local authorities getting that right if they're bearing 50% of the cost of that rates relief. So you can have a little bit of discretion in there, but it's whether we're just happy with the 0% for 3 months, 50% for 3 months, 100% for 3 months, and that for after the 6 months.
I think it would be hard to police discretion,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
You just have to go for the kill.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Gillian, what do you think?
I agree with what Melanie's saying, and if they want to appeal it, then they can appeal it. But yeah. 0, 50, 100.
Yeah,
Makes
fair enough.
sense. It makes sense. Gives them the incentive. But as I say, it comes down to LPS as well, getting their data right. And allowing us to change it if it needs to be changed.
Sorry, another thing to look at as well. I mean, we're looking at that from the landlord with the unit, right? But what about when if they get a new tenant? Do you know what I mean? Within that time scale, to encourage a tenant to take the unit as well. Could there be a reduction on the rates there? Because as Jimmy pointed out there's a lot of businesses under charitable status coming in and get relief on the rates. But if you're a landlord and you're trying to get somebody to rent your property, what's the incentive to get a new tenant in? Is there a reduction because it's quite costly at the start for them? Is there anything that could be done to encourage them for the first 3 months of a new tenant that they get a reduction?
Maybe
Or
some
everybody gonna get a
people, like, there is a small business rates relief, isn't
Yeah.
there? Or is that now gone away? Haven't you looked at it in a long time? In terms of a new property owner coming in, they can get reduced rates
New
for 6
business.
months.
Yeah, new business they do, don't they? If the building's been vacant for a year, isn't that it? They get it, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
and
stuff already.
I suppose by them getting their tenant, they're immediately getting a benefit because their liability's taken from them then. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why they frustrate the life out of me so much when that happens. You know, that would happen, but they'll still not let their properties for less than they think they should be getting. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
I just love landlords.
So
It sounds like it at the minute, Melanie. But then when you think about it, this is what the part I don't understand, and being silly, but I always thought, is it not better to have some rent than no rent?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know,
And they're not having to pay the rates. I don't get it at all. Anyway,
and the heating's not on. You know what it's like. A building can go into disrepair quite quickly with no heating or anything like that in it. So you would think to yourself, well, you would rather have a tenant in and them paying less than no tenant at all.
yeah.
No, this is where the property market is funny. So there is a reason for this, I think, and I'm gonna try and get it right, but don't quote me on this. So
It
this
brings down the capital value, isn't that
the
it?
capital, Melanie, you're ahead of me. So it's about the capital value, the book value of the properties when the rent comes down. Once the property owner has admitted the rent needs to come down, it alters the capital value of the actual property. And what that means is if the property is leveraged, so there's borrowing against the property, which has allowed the property owner to purchase it, like they're paying a mortgage. Once the capital value has come down, it can leave them in financial trouble. So I don't know if in the commercial sector you can end up with negative equity like you can when you own a home, and ultimately the value of your home has fallen while you're paying off the mortgage, so that the mortgage you're paying off is well in excess of what the house is actually valued at. I think it's a similar thing when it comes to commercial property. So once you start tampering with the rent, it changes that value of the property permanently. And so that's what, for those who just see it as an investment opportunity, that's what they want to avoid. But the truth is, partly because of the digital economy and the way consumer behavior has changed, ultimately there is probably too much value in commercial property. Those values are probably lower than what a lot of these property owners would like them to be. That's just the.
I know there has to be a reality check for them too. You know, I get what you're saying. You know, I do know one landlord here in Lisburn in particular, you know, who's still holding out, you know, for 2008 rents. You know, he's living in Clyde Cuckoo land, but loaded. They're not mortgaged. They're not this. Oh, I don't get it. Anyway. Yeah, you can hear the frustration, can't you?
Absolutely can. Right. So what we'll do then is we're going to take forward Chris's idea. That's how we'll respond to the consultation. So it is pretty much giving the Department for Finance what they want. It's just asking for an extra 3 months just for those who are making a decent attempt at actually reletting their property. I think that's perfectly fair. I think that's perfectly sensible. And I think we've already identified some of the other priorities we think the executive needs to look at around rates. I think the data point Gillian makes is a really good one. So making sure LPS has good data on property owners to ensure we've got good collection. And this doesn't have to be just about business rates now. What are the big things that have been neglected over the last 2 years that we need a running start on? What are the things that need to be picked up straight away? I'm going to throw one out there and say even just the task force, the High Streets task force, should be set up and should get going straight away, because there is so much within that was meant to be progressed that's just sat on the shelf for what, 1.5 years, probably longer than that. So other ideas, whether it's specific regeneration schemes or pots of funding, etc., I'd love to hear it all.
Well,
The
yeah,
task
get the
force
tax.
Sorry, you go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, get the task force up and running. I have to say, whenever it comes to funding, regeneration wise, from DFC or whatever, I think we've nearly fared better with no government, but here that's another story. Our civil servants here that we deal with are very good. But I know that's not the case across the board. So,
The
but yeah,
task force, if we're going to get it up and running again, it needs money because there was no budget attached to it, so it was just a talking shop. So that like don't set it up unless you're going to put money behind it. There's a whole load of UK funds that were never properly introduced into Northern Ireland. Even the Levelling Up Fund, which didn't require the Assembly, was suspended. So I think the third round of Levelling Up Fund, so that should be opened up straight away. And then there's a whole load of other things, and I can't remember the name. You'll know them, OJ, but all of whenever the Tories announced, what was it, 20 billion for towns? I'm not sure the name.
This is the long-term plan for towns.
Yeah, so can we have some of that and
Yeah.
various other funds that have been introduced over the recent years that we just didn't get? There is a problem that whenever that extra money comes from Westminster, the finance department just gives it to the health service. And of course, we've got an unreformed health service, so it's really wasteful and inefficient. And we can't just keep giving all the money to the health service. There are other priorities in Northern Ireland. And certainly high streets should be one because that's wealth creation. We're not creating enough wealth, and then we're going progressively more and more into debt and funding shortfalls. So we need to actually limit the money that we are spend within our means in terms of social programs and health service, and actually do invest some money in wealth creation and in high streets. And that just hasn't happened over recent years.
I will go further and say when you invest in money in high streets, especially around urban planning and design, creating a better environment, then there's actually a lot you can do around health, which helps prevent illnesses down the line. So that's what a lot of design agencies are talking about at the moment, is this intersection between health and the high street, which the UK has been pretty poor at recently. And so when it comes to things like health budgets, even the NHS has spotted an opportunity of being more involved in high streets since the pandemic, because they realise how critical they are to keeping people healthy. So, I think there's a fair case to say that actually some of that money should be going to town centres. So I think that's a worthwhile claim. And I would say maybe some of that work should take place through the APPG for town centres in Westminster, and also the Northern Ireland Secretary of State as well. So where it comes to claiming back some of that money that should have gone to Northern Ireland anyway, but possibly didn't because of the challenges with the executive, then I think that dialogue we need to have with Westminster to say, now that we're back and running, let's get these funds to the town centres that need it. I think that's a fair ask.
Yeah.
Other things as well we should be looking at.
Infrastructure. In terms of public transport, electric charging points. That's what we're being asked for. But that needs to be looked at Northern Ireland as a whole. And I know that there's been fractions, there's certain parts of the province that are going down their own strategies and not coming together as a whole. We're too small to be going into individual council level on that one. And I definitely agree with the High Street Task Force. But I would say I wouldn't want it to be run the same way as we've had our last two major fundings coming through from the departments, i.e. the COVID recovery and the small settlements programme, which never has enough time frame and is unrealistic in terms of budgets and council contributions to that. So yes, let's get this High Street Task Force up and running, but let's be realistic in terms of timescales and money involved in it. Because the timescales, when you're given 12 months to run a programme, it doesn't work. And people are just doing stuff for the sake of it, and that's not long-term planning, which needs to be taken into consideration. So yeah, High Street Task Force right at the top, and they need to be talking to the people that actually operate on the ground. I have found, just with the last consultation we did in that 21st century High Street, there was a top-down approach rather than top-down and a bottom-up approach to that one. So that's what I would be caveating that with.
Okay, so I mean that makes sense. The task force in England, I think, is a 4-year program rather than just a 12 months. I think that's got to be far more acceptable than just 12 months, isn't it? So I would hope they wouldn't set up the task force in Northern Ireland as just a 12-month program.
That's one of the problems. We don't have a 3, 5, 10-year plan within the executive. It's always been annual plans.
Yeah.
And that feeds down into our own council, which we're trying to change, in that we need to be looking at 3, 5, 7, 10-year plans in terms of budgets. It can't all be done in 12-month cycles. We have to be allowed to carry over if projects are overrun.
Cool.
Folks, I have another meeting at 11, so I need to.
So do I, actually. I just had a message in there to ping us. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No problem. No problem.
Nice to see you all. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jamie. Thanks a lot, Julie. Any other points we need to pick up? I think there's already some decent points there. So we need to think broader around business rates and property. We need to think about challenges around funding in terms of some of the big funds that have been made available across the UK, but not Northern Ireland. So what can we claw back from that? Challenges around infrastructure that have being neglected, and of course making sure there's a proper budget and timeline for the Northern Ireland High Streets Task Force, which needs to get up and running straight away. It feels to me like there's a good start in there.
Yeah.
Specifically to Belfast, there has been a long-standing program, Streets Ahead. I don't know if you've come across it, OJ. Streets Ahead was a public realm regeneration for the city centre, and there's 2 programs that have been agreed and budgets allocated. And the first is Streets Ahead 3, which is the Cathedral Quarter area. And of course, we've just had £400 million spent on Ulster University campus, and there's another 100 million plus going in on the Belfast Stories tourist attraction. And the Cathedral Quarter is already, an important area for hospitality and nightlife, yet it looks extremely poor in terms of the public realm. So it's £30 million being allocated to that. It was literally about to start. They had everything procured and design and everything done, and then the last assembly fell in 2017, and they just didn't rush it through quickly enough to get the ministerial signature, and they couldn't go ahead and had to stop. And here we are 7 years later, it still never went ahead. But it's all kind of in place, ready to go, but we just need the multi-year budget to spend that 30 million. Then there's Streets Ahead 5, which is another 30 million in South Belfast in the Linen Quarter area. And again, you've got £250 million being spent on the new Grand Central Station, 400 million being spent on Weaver's Cross, and a lot of it's 1.2 billion pounds being spent in South Belfast in the Linen Quarter, and yet the streetscape is very, very poor. So we need that 30 million to support the regeneration and to act as a catalyst for further regeneration. So there's 60 million quid that has been agreed. I would just like to ensure that's brought forward again.
What about the city deal, Chris? What are you getting out of that?
Well, that's the Belfast Stories would be part of the city deal. There's the North-South glider as well. It's got a major budget shortfall though, because I think it's only got 40 million on the city deal, and the original estimate was 100, but now with inflation it's probably more like 150. So there's like well over £100 million shortfall between the north-south glider, but it's really essential if we want to realize the vision of, you know, reducing car use in the city centre and modal shift, etc. And then there's 10 million for a bridge. So there's quite a lot of city deal projects in Belfast. In Ards and North Down, where I'm also a councillor, then there's the £110 million Bangor waterfront regeneration under the city deal, and it's crawling along. I mean, it's so frustrating how slow it is to progress, but
I've
it
seen the
is
social media around it, and
it is.
everybody's sort of fed
I
up,
I
aren't
mean, behind the scenes, it is progressing. A lot of the reports are confidential, but you know, it is literally a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back with that one.
they? Okay. I know we have money coming through from that, but a lot of it's going to Hillsborough. It needs a big upgrade.
Mm.
And there's been consultation upon consultation to get the public realm all sorted out up there, and nobody can agree. And I don't know how it's going to go. I'm regeneration as well. I don't know how it's going to go forward. I live in Hillsborough as well. And the problem with Hillsborough is everybody thinks they own it. So I don't know how they're ever going to get the money spent. Anyway.
That's all really useful. That's all really useful. I think there's a lot there to work with. Unless anybody else has any other burning issues. Lisa, is there anything you think we should probably progress with quickly?
Not at the moment, not at the top of my head.
No problem. No problem. If there's anything that comes to mind, then just drop me an email. Let me know, and we'll see what we can take forward.
Okay.
Brill. Thanks, guys. And I think just for the last few minutes, just want to chat about Christmas and how things went, how your businesses are feeling, if there's any issues happening on high streets we should be aware of before we let you go. So Mel, you were saying that Christmas was good in Lisbon. Christmas is always good in Lisbon.
The footfall was really good this year, as I said, you know, more so than other years. We kind of upped the ante a bit. But our age-old problem is getting the businesses all engaged and getting them all opened at night is the big thing. Hospitality done brilliant. We were delighted with the feedback we've got from them so far, and hopefully that will filter through to some of the retail that we would like to see open. But I'm not holding my breath.
We heard a similar story from members across the network that retail didn't do particularly well, especially in December, seemed quite flat, but hospitality did do well. And lots of places reporting that when people went out, they were going out for leisure trips, and possibly going to restaurants and pubs, whatever. Not so much necessarily just for shopping though.
No, and I would agree with that certainly. And Lisburn, I mean, the ones that came, as I said, hospitality 35 and 40% up on last December. But by the same token, you know, our retail I think held its own, but they're not going to do it if they're not open.
Yeah.
You know, and we did have people, you know, the visitors and that, because we were there every night. Tell you, I was glad to get December over. And we had visitors and all, and they would have been, oh, we thought this would have been open, we thought that would, and that was our only negative feedback on our whole program, that the shops weren't open at night. You know, so they're not going to up it any by keeping the door closed. And I do get it. You know, it's difficult. You know, and for sole traders especially, you know, or smaller independents. But still, it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
So here, if you have anything that we can use to incentivize them, please share.
You would show them your footfall numbers, Melanie, and say, look,
Well,
if you're
yeah, and we do, and we've done this before, and then they'll say, yeah, but they're not in the shop. I go, well, they're not if you're closed. And you know, I think maybe 2019, yeah, we did get a consensus that they would all open this certain week, or I can't even remember now. And they opened one night and then thought, oh, no, it wasn't really busy, so they didn't bother. You know, they wouldn't, you know, it's the chicken and egg thing too, really, isn't it? It's getting somebody to jump first, but it's so frustrating.
Yeah,
But
certainly
that,
that.
I mean, I know that event you had at the Castle Gardens, and it got everybody confused because there was the
The Antrim
of
one,
an Antrim as
but we
well.
were free.
Well, you see, do you know what? I have been telling everybody about that because people have been talking to me and saying, "Oh, you can't get tickets for the cat." Here's me, there's one in Lisburn. And they're like, "What?" I says, "And it's free." And it just wasn't as commercialized as the
Yeah,
one in the Antrim Castle Gardens is.
no,
So it said a few people went down, said it was absolutely fantastic. And as you
yeah, we
say,
were pleased.
some people don't visit Lisburn. You know, you have I have to go into Belfast, don't shop anywhere else, or a Macrofelt or Ballymena.
Mhm.
So when that opens and the shops are open and people are like, we must get down here a day. So they
Yes,
may not be maybe spending that time, or they have a look around the shop and say, God, I must get down here a wee day. Because that's
yeah,
what they do if they visit
yeah.
another town, the shops are open.
Like
But
we
it's
run
very
loads of
frustrating.
events. We run loads of events as well. 20 something events, and on the Saturdays, one of our music Saturdays was phenomenal this year. Started off with the cathedral and then the band of the Royal Irish and everything. Town was chocker up to 8 o'clock, but of course at 5 o'clock it shut down. You know, and I mean, I don't expect them to be open on a Saturday night, but this was the things that we were doing on Fridays and that as well. Um, so yeah, it's just I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. And from our point of view, you know, here in city centre management, like we would be afraid of getting funding pulled, because it's to whatever we do is to raise the footfall to help the businesses. But the businesses need to help themselves too, and if they're not doing that, you know, we've had murmurs from councillors going, well, what's the point in doing it if they're not going to open? Um, so yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
There's nothing as bad as walking down a street with loads of people in it and all you see is the shutters down.
hmm
You know,
That
kind
was
of
one thing about
terrible.
this year that they wouldn't, that if yours aren't going to open, please keep your shutters up. And the majority of them did, but still, the shop is still closed.
Yeah, and in terms of repeat footfall as well, I guess when people know the businesses are going to be closed, it's not
Yeah,
the incentive to come back isn't at that same time isn't necessarily there, is it? And in fairness to a lot of businesses, I know there's still lots of challenges around staffing.
oh yes,
Yeah.
and I get that. Yeah,
Yeah. So I know there's a few businesses reporting that for the beginning of January, they're just not opening long hours. They're just staffing and energy is just continues to
yeah,
be a
and the
problem.
energy too, of course. You know,
Uh,
it is a thing. Um, and I would be very sympathetic, you know, but still, there's still that
Still, yeah,
frustration there too.
it's Christmas, isn't it?
Yeah, even that week, you know, coming up to Christmas. You know, Christmas was Sunday or Monday this year. Monday. So that week, the town was so busy,
Yeah.
and we still couldn't get them all to open. That even that week would have been a
Wow.
big thing.
Wow. Wow. Catherine, I don't know if you're there. I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about Belfast.
Hi, yes. Sorry, I joined the call very late and I didn't want to jump in just
Oh, it's fine.
at
No,
the
jump
end.
in. We're nice like that.
No, Chris has explained quite a number of the projects that's happening here in Belfast. He mentioned a project that's been implemented in the team that I work in here in Belfast, the Vacant to Vibrant scheme, which has been fantastic in terms of trying to encourage SMEs into the city centre. We carried out an analysis of our city centre in terms of like an asset strategy to look to see what have we got, where are there gaps, what are the sectors we're looking at. We're a new university city as well, and we're very much in tune with the regeneration of our city centre as well. And like other city centres in the UK and Ireland, it does come with its problems. We have a huge site right slap bang in the middle of the city centre that the development has been stalled, and then there are other schemes in the city centre as well that where viability, or developers are telling us that viability then becomes an issue. But in terms of some experiences that I've had with dealing with landlords, is that they're holding out for a bigger ticket. And I don't know whether, some, the councils are experiencing this in some of their towns and smaller settlements as well, that they're holding out for a bigger ticket in terms of they don't want like a temporary let for like an SME for 2 years, possibly paying maybe in their eyes possibly a lesser rent than those that they may get a multinational if the pitch is right and if the footfall is right, and they are holding out for that. And as a result, then we do have that vacancy. So I think that sort of becomes an issue with us, and that's sort of what we're looking towards. But as we've discussed on the call, there's some really good opportunities coming down the line in terms of the City Deal and the Belfast Stories, as Chris had mentioned as well. So we're looking forward to that and trying to position Belfast in a way in which retail is not the only show in town here, that we're looking at leisure uses as well. And that has been indicative of some of the lettings that we've had with some of our new developments. Say, for example, the former BHS store has secured quite a number of large lettings, albeit some of those lettings have been a movement of and a consolidation of brand space in the city centre. Around COVID time, Belfast itself had been hit pretty badly with CVAs from the larger scale organisations like the Arcadia Group, etc. And we had one street in particular, Donegal Place, which was getting a bit worrying because there was so many closures, and it was 1 week there was one new closure after another, which is a street just directly opposite City Hall. But it's made a fantastic comeback. The Ivy has just announced it's opening towards the end of this year. So I think a lot of that has been instigated by Queen's Arcade, that have taken in a lot of higher price point brands. So that street itself, there is a clustering of brands happening within the street with, we've got Rolex and Gucci, and now we've got the Ivy restaurant just on that part of the street. But that's not withstanding the spend power of the people coming into Belfast. We need to attract the right type of brands that comes into the city. And equally, something that the report that we commissioned in terms of our asset strategy was conscious of was the new Ulster University opening just at the top of Royal Avenue, and just to make sure that one weekend overnight we had 17,000 students coming into Belfast for either staying or participating in courses or lectures, or professionals coming into the university. So just to make sure that, the city itself is offering the right product for those people to stay in the city centre. And as a result of that, we're working on a procurement exercise for a private sector partner to instigate the residential aspect of Belfast as well. So we're trying to attract the people on all different levels to live, to work, to come here and study, and to stay on then as well, and opening up businesses. So it's a tall challenge, but I suppose that's seen throughout all the towns and cities in the north and south, and also in the UK as well.
That's really useful insight. I think there's lots there. It certainly, in terms of the residential element, ATCM is looking really closely at the overlap between commercial destinations and introducing mixed-use space. So introducing residential, we are going to be taking a deep dive into that on the 28th of Feb for those who can make it over to London Euston. We've got a day-long conference on housing in town centres and city centres. We might even have a case study on Belfast actually on the agenda.
I think a case study in Belfast would be brilliant because, you know, historically the city was closed, was under lock and key in the 1980s. So it wasn't a place where people lived, and we're trying to change that. I suppose that trying to attract more people into the city centre, and there is an attraction for private sector organisations coming in and buying up land and putting up student accommodation as well. So we're trying to move toward, you know, past that and making sure that we have, you know, the environment in place for people where they want to stay, they want to create a business, they want to use Belfast as an ecosystem, because, you know, there's a lot of thriving sectors here, and it's about harnessing that and making sure that, you know, that we have that in place. So whilst it's quite in its infancy, there's a lot of exciting projects, a lot of large scale projects coming forward.
Yeah, and I think that they're important things to focus on as well. The sort of broader ecosystem when it comes to bringing in residents. Do they have the right environment, given it might be a commercial destination? Do they have the right services, right facilities, etc.? How
Our
do
planning
we?
laws are different here as well than we do have in England in terms of PD rights too. So
Yeah.
and then also as well, we have just got our local development plan strategy adopted. Now there's another part to that in terms of the local policies plan. But that, you know, before we had the LDP, we're still looking to the Belfast Urban Area Plan, which was created in the 1980s when the city was under lock and key. So you know, there's a lot of different challenges here. And then as Melanie and Lisa had spoke about on the call as well, that we work on a fragmented government system, which can be really hard to navigate our way around, and trying to get permissions and approvals to break those barriers to create the change.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can absolutely imagine. Yeah, I think England is quite specific in terms of using permitted development to bring forward housing in town centres. And, you know, I know for the English, it's a mess. It is an absolute mess. We'll be covering that at the conference and the disaster it is. But certainly looking at other ways of bringing housing into town centres, such as the approach taken, especially in Scotland and Wales, will all be on the agenda for that conference. So that's really fascinating. And I think that shift from not necessarily away from retail, but from retail to incorporate more leisure and hospitality uses as well. Yeah, it's something we see in so many towns and cities across the UK. And on the issue as well of property owners holding out for the big ticket. I don't know exactly when you joined the call, but Melanie was explaining something very similar for Lisbon, the property owners that just want to hold out, just to get something which is right for them. And if they need to sit on a property, they'll sit on it for as long as they can before they make the move.
Yeah, that's what happens, especially if, sorry, Melanie, to cut in on you, especially if they have a large portfolio of properties and a lot of them are thriving. But if one is failing, it balances out their spreadsheets then as well. So they can afford to let property sit, which then becomes an issue as well. Sorry, Melanie.
I was going to ask, loads of stuff going on in Belfast, but one of the things you were saying about Queen's Arcade and getting those brands in, but the thing about Queen's Arcade, in my opinion anyway, is it's a lot of smaller shops. We seem to have a lot of bigger that are too big. You know, we would love to have, well, we'd love to have those brands. It's not going to happen in Lisburn, but even the, you know, smaller independents, but all the properties are too big. You know, and I was trying to talk to the landlords to split them some way. But it's trying to get the landlords to pay some money regardless, or put some money into their properties. But do you know, Belfast especially, is some of your units really, really not too big? People are looking something smaller.
I think, I suppose, with the example with Queen's Arcade, you're exactly right. The units there are a smaller footprint, and I suppose they kind of allow for like almost like each shop in Queen's Arcade is individual and have their own space, and then it's together like a consortium of shops within like a space. But we do have like Eason's, say for example, which is quite OJ, I don't know whether you're familiar with Eason's, the former Eason shop in Belfast. Quite a strange sort of layout of shop. There's like escalators down, and it had a huge basement, and it's just like, you know, what retailer could look at that and think, how can I adopt that to my business model, because it there's an upstairs and a downstairs, and that doesn't always suit a lot of brands. And then there's accessibility is also then another issue as well. So we do have those large format floor plates in parts of the city as well. But I suppose the benefits of having that in the city, it does attract, just say if like a high, just say like if a brand wanted to come and open up like a store, like say for example, River Island opened up a store just recently on Donegal Place, which is consolidation of two other stores, one in Victoria Square, which is our shopping centre, but also then in Donegal Place, they moved across the road and took two properties side by side. So they created like a larger store. So what we're finding is a lot of those brands are consolidating into one space, and it might be a larger space. So I suppose we're finding that, but then it's leaving behind those other stores. But we have, as part of the Vacant to Vibrant scheme, we have an agent employed as a matchmaker, we call him, to matchmake, you know, vacant spaces to the people coming through the Vacant to Vibrant scheme. So with that, we get a certain level of market intelligence as well, anecdotally, obviously, as well as some of the transactions that agent is currently undertaking as well. But retail isn't dead. There is a space for it, and you know, I think I read an article somewhere online to say that 2024 is going to be the renaissance of retail, and equally because I think it was 2018 the decimation of retail, so it is making a bit of a comeback, and even some of the reports through CBRE are coming forward as showing that retail transactions are still happening in some of their reports that are openly available. So it does give it a place, and I suppose people like to go out and still have that day out experience of going into a city to go shopping, to go and have lunch, to go and have a coffee, to meet up with friends, but it's also trying to retain that dwell time, to push it into the overnight and make it a weekend break. And so with that, you need to have the leisure associated with it then as well. Sorry,
I mean,
OJ, you probably regret bringing me in.
No, it's all fascinating. It's all great. And I was just going to say on retail. So we were looking at some of the stats when I was at a meeting in Croydon last week on retail, and it's funny. You look at sort of online retail increasing in terms of its market share up until the pandemic, and then in the pandemic it shoots up, and then coming out of the pandemic, it's interesting to see that it's fallen all the way back again. And clearly, coming out of the pandemic, people have been more than happy to go back to physical shops again, physical bricks and mortar. So there's definitely a space for retail. There's an appetite for it, but it is absolutely about the broader mix, the broader ecosystem of any town or city centre, whether it's leisure, hospitality, housing and residential. I think they're all critical parts that make up an ecosystem. And then as well, it's making sure those retailers have the right support they need. So, you know, understanding, you know, the reasons which Mel has rightly brought up around why retailers aren't necessarily taking those opportunities during the golden quarter and opening up at the right hours. What's happening behind the scenes? That means they're shutting early. Is it about staffing, and is it about energy? Are there other reasons why they're not taking on the opportunities where they can to get some easy money into the tills? So there is stuff we need to be focused on there as well. So nice. That's lots of information. Thanks everybody for that. That's all golden stuff. I am going to try and make it over to Belfast. If things fall into place, then I will come over for the summit. Is it a couple of weeks on Thursday, Chris?
15th of February.
15th of February.
Do-
So yeah.
When will you know? Because I was gonna write to DFC just to see if I could get a meeting with you, but
Yeah. So I've begged and pleaded with my better half, and she said, "Look, if it's that important, you can go." So I'm in. But what I was going to say is, if we can get that meeting with the Department of Communities, then I'll definitely come. If we can't, then I might save my trip for when we can have that meeting.
okay.
So yeah, if we can get a meeting, then I'll be there.
It doesn't matter if you go either side, then either the Wednesday or the Friday.
There's either side.
Okay,
So
I'll try and...
for now, what I'll do in my diary is I'll just block out those 3 days. So
Okay.
either one.
Okay. All right. I'll email them today.
Oh, fab. Thank you. Thank you. Brill, thanks a lot, guys. So I will email the rest of the group to ask them for their thoughts on things they would like to see as a matter of priority. And then with Chris, we'll get these either to the right people in Stormont or the right people in Westminster, depending on what the ask is. And we'll take it from there. With Laura will take forward the consultation response as well on business rates, and we'll also look at that broader reform once Stormont is ready to do that as well, because as we know, business rates it's definitely not a perfect tax system. And then what we will also do is we'll get dates in the diary for the rest of the year, and we'll see if we can put in the diary as well, possibly one physical round table. We will have a round table south of the border. I think we're looking at Mullingar for anybody that wants to attend. And that meeting will be specifically designed so anybody across the island of Ireland will be able to jump in on that. And I think we'll be discussing a lot even in the nighttime economy as part of that particular meeting. So all will be welcome across the island of Ireland. We won't talk too much about specifically around anything that might be happening with the Irish government. We'll try and keep it as general as possible around best practice. So it's something that will work for everyone. So I think that's it. 1 minute to 11:30. I think we're there. So thanks a lot, guys. That's a really fascinating meeting.